When I read, in the June 2000 issue of official UK PlayStation magazine, that Vagrant Story, a revolutionary new RPG from Squaresoft, was like a cross between Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid, well, I'm sure regular viewers can imagine my reaction. Yeah, from the privileged position of hindsight I now find myself in nearly 21 years after the game's release, I can categorically state that Vagrant Story is not like Final Fantasy or Metal Gear Solid. In fact, Vagrant Story is not like any game. For over 2 decades, this most unique of action, puzzle, story-driven, sort of turn-based, sort of real-time, strategy, Japanese role-playing games has defied any and all attempts to chain it with the shackles of genre, making an absolute mockery both of sentences like this one and also naive first-time players expecting to glide through something comfy and familiar. Naive first-time players like me. Back in the year 2000, I barreled into Vagrant Story with the bloated confidence of a boy fresh from completing both Final Fantasy VII and VIII. I know how to take it in turns to hit dragons, I thought, equip sword, kill monsters, level up, repeat, and while that kind of attitude might see you through the first couple of hours, there will come a point, and for me it was this nothing fight against a basic phantom, where Vagrant Story just has no more time for anyone who hasn't paid full attention to the intricacies of its battle system. Now, obviously, this story has a happy ending. Vagrant Story is my 3rd favourite game of all time, but at first, it is a difficult game to love, even harder to master, and unique to the extent that I honestly don't think we will see its like ever again. The unapologetic complexity of the gameplay systems is the first and, to be fair, smallest reason why. The early game shallows of Vagrant Story are peppered with the floundering splashes of players who never made it past that initial wave of difficulty. But this is a different school of challenge to the kind many of us enjoy in modern-day hardcore action RPGs like Bloodborne. Enjoy. Because it's not the bosses themselves that are necessarily difficult in Vagrant Story. I mean, this little ghost is... You know, look at him. He's about as dangerous as Casper. The problem I and many Vagrant Story noobs had is that we didn't understand how to get our weapons to do any damage to the slippery bugger. And so there I was, buried in the strategy guide, partly out of desperation, partly because it smelled really nice. God, I miss strategy guides. Trying to fathom what the heck I was supposed to do. I fathomed it. Workshops. I mean, that is mostly it. Workshops in Vagrant Story are where the boss battles are won and lost. Not the chain abilities, not the break arts, not the roulette wheel gambling game of level up that teases you with HP +4 before slapping you with intelligence +2. But the workshops. As you push through the city of Leomond, the workshops are like little beacons of progress. The uplifting musical notes and save points sparkle as you enter, marking respite from the dungeon-crawling dangers outside, while simultaneously presenting you with the tools to more effectively batter them. Because every weapon you pick up in Vagrant Story, no matter how seemingly insignificant, is incredibly important. Every blade, every bow, every spear is imbued with unique properties that can mean the difference between dealing pathetic amounts of damage or massive amounts. The workshops are where you get to pull the weapons apart, detaching blades from grips before working them into all new creations laced with the DNA of their constituent parts. So, say I've got this banana, and it's really effective against dragons, but I don't like fighting with bananas. I prefer fighting with apples, only this apple is rubbish against dragons. What you can do is, you can disassemble the banana and work its properties into the apple. So, now, the apple has the dragon-slaying properties of the banana. And that's just the very basic stuff. Crafting weapons and armour and playing about with elemental affinities and types and classes will swallow hours of your time in Vagrant Story. You know, the workshops are like the engine room of the battle system. Getting good in this game is less about mastering the timing of chain abilities and more about learning how to get the most out of the materials available to you, making sure you've got something up your sleeve for every mace-wielding, fire-breathing, bodiless suit of armour you come across. If you needed any further indication of how much importance Vagrant Story places on fiddling about with your blades and breastplates, have a look at the game's one and only CG movie. You don't even see Ashley Riot's face in this, just his hands as he pieces together equipment and tries it out on thin air. Welcome to the game, this movie says. Get smithing. Plus, you get to name your weapons too, bestowing upon them an importance and a permanence, encouraging you to really think about what you want to make and what you want to take apart. It might sound daft, but as your weapons grow in strength, so too will your bond with them. You know, I remember, after hours of battling side by side, having to finally say goodbye to my trusty spear.
I'm sorry, Steve.
Now, you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, look, a deep weapon crafting system is great and all, but that hardly makes Vagrant Story unique, and you'd be right. But the weapon crafting is just one cog in a complex, interlinking clockwork of systems that not only work together to create satisfying, harmonious gameplay, they also complement and reinforce the intangible essence of what Vagrant Story is. So you've got this crafting system where you can have a sword that's really good at fighting beasts, and you can break it up and weave its properties into a spear or a bow or an axe. You know, there's a flexibility to your equipment in this way, a kind of reluctance to adhere to or be bound by one single shape or form. And I think that sort of echoes the genre-fluid nature of Vagrant Story itself, and I don't think that's accidental. You know, you'll be walking around with a piece of body armour forged from a vest and a pair of old gloves, while playing this real-time strategy RPG hybrid stitched together with platforming sections, block puzzles and weapon crafting. So the very game through which Ashley Riot stalks and sweeps is as much a finely honed, inexplicably effective mishmash of disparate parts as the homemade weapons he wields. Vagrant Story, then, is its own workshop masterpiece, with a story propelled by these wonderfully cinematic, impeccably directed cutscenes that are unlike anything I've seen in a video game before or since.
And we need to take a moment here to talk about Vagrant Story's cutscenes because, my word, they are phenomenal.
In fact, the only game, certainly on the original PlayStation, that even comes close to the directorial attention to detail of these cutscenes would be Metal Gear Solid.
Maybe the magazine was right.
But even then you can't really compare the two. I mean, look at this. Every single shot looks like it's been lifted from the pages of a graphic novel. The framing, the pacing, the positioning of the dialogue boxes, which we'll get onto shortly. There's an elegance and a precision and a deliberateness to every single shot here, and you can see this rhythmic exactness played out in Vagrant Story's battles as well. Chain abilities let you add effects to your attacks by pressing either circle, square or triangle at just the right time. So to succeed in combat in Vagrant Story, you have to first have crafted all your weapons yourself, as we've discussed, and then deploy them with all the care and craft of a cinematographer lining up the perfect shot. You know, you can't just go hammering the attack button and wail on enemies until they die. You have to pay attention. The same amount of attention you need to afford these cutscenes. The same attention that went into crafting them in the first place.
I mentioned earlier that Vagrant Story is a difficult game to love, and this is sort of what I mean. There's a wonderfully layered game to enjoy here, but you've got to do the work.
On to that dialogue then, which acts as far more than just exposition. Translated from Yasumi Matsuno's original Japanese script by Alexander O. Smith, the English language version of Vagrant Story is, in my humble opinion, one of the most incredible pieces of video game localization ever. Anyone who's played Vagrant Story will know the script hasn't been translated word for word. Instead, Smith has infused it with an unmistakable Shakespearean lilt that by its very nature adds richness and depth to the story. Dialogue here is exposition, but it's also texture. The content of the sentences eloquently spinning Vagrant Story's narrative silk, while their form acts as mortar for world building.
You know, Shakespearean language is evocative by its very nature. It suggests history and romance and tragedy.
And it also evokes the sense that there's some deeper meaning, you know. There's an elusiveness to Shakespearean style verse that I'm sure every school kid who's had to decipher Hamlet, for instance, can instantly relate to. I remember sitting with groups of my friends at school trying to unravel old Williams plays and rework them into modern English. And I'm not saying Vagrant Story's dialogue is stylized to the extent it's difficult to understand. I just mean that by injecting a slightly ye olde English cadence to the text, you naturally get that sense of mystery, of history, of grandeur almost. The dialogue here is working on multiple levels. It's telling you the tale of this world, while at the same time lending every facet of Vagrant Story's fiction a sense of groundedness, of medieval authenticity. The dark, enigmatic city of Leamond, where the game takes place, is one of my favourite settings in video games, but perhaps even more than the angled, rustic visuals inspired by the real-life French town of Saint-Emilion, even more than Hitoshi Sakimoto's ethereal score, it's Alexander Smith's elegant translation of Yasumi Matsuno's script that makes this place feel alive.
And then there's the fact that the actual script itself is just, it is on point, which is a good job, I suppose. Otherwise, everything else I just mentioned would be for naught, as Shakespeare might say.
If you want to stretch this even further, and of course I do, you could also say the dialogue reinforces and elevates the battle system, animation and characters of Vagrant Story too. There's a thrust and a fluidity to the prose. At times it's sharp and edged, at others soft and subdued, but it's never still. You know, it's always a bit spiky, a bit agitated, like there's a churning, restless core boiling away just beneath the surface.
You see, I was talking about the script then, while showing you footage of Ashley Riot fighting. And it just worked.
Seriously though, look at how this guy moves. He's like smoke, graceful and dangerous all at once. Smoke with taut buttocks. And the same could be said of all the cast. Elegant, enigmatic, sharp and sexy, like human embodiments of Shakespearean prose as they whirl and dance across Vagrant Story's narrative stage, like classically trained actors in a play. And if you think I'm maybe reading a bit too much into the whole Shakespeare angle, remember this guy is literally called Romeo Guildenstern. Ultimately though, the reason I don't think we'll ever see another game like Vagrant Story is because modern games are able to build their worlds and express character and narrative nuance in ways that don't require anywhere near the same level of work from the player. And by that, I mean the technological advancements of video games as a medium have reached a point where they're able to extinguish any sense that there is a medium there at all. You know, nowadays, we don't need turn-based battle systems in RPGs to spark an imagined real-time cinematic version in our minds. Because games can just serve us the real-time cinematic version firsthand. We don't need Shakespearean frills on expository text to add warmth and weight to character dialogue and to inform us how it should be read and interpreted, because we've got fully voiced and acted characters who do that work for us.
I think they should be terrified of me.
Most modern video game systems are designed to be as unobtrusive as possible, to get out of your way, to make it as easy as possible for players to slip into that golden state of full immersion. Vagrant Story didn't have those luxuries when it released over 20 years ago. This was a time when video games were still figuring out what they wanted to be and how they wanted to look, that sort of awkward adolescence between pixelated 2D sprites on isometric backdrops and fully rendered 3D characters in environments. Vagrant Story had to make combat strategical and turn-based-ish. It had to have text-based dialogue. But what the game did with those systems was go above and beyond, coiling them together in such a way that every swing of Ashley Riot's sword, every word that comes out of his mouth, and every deliberately placed panel of cutscene is working double time to not only fulfill its primary function, but also to bring you that same sense of immersion, that same richness of detail that we enjoy in the very best games of today.
So, the reason I don't think we'll ever see another game quite like Vagrant Story is because modern video games achieve that same goal of immersion, but just in totally different ways.
And also because I can't imagine another game ever taking the creative decision to ask the player to spend 50% of their time soldering gauntlets into chainmail. So yeah, when I returned home all those years ago with a fresh box copy of Vagrant Story, little did I know I held in my hands a game I'd really have to work to enjoy. But in the end, one I enjoyed so much, it became one of my favourites of all time. And while writing this video, I'm seriously beginning to wonder whether it might actually be my number one. Did you play Vagrant Story back in the day? Let us know in the comments, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you're always up to date with everything from the world of PlayStation. Thanks for watching, we'll catch you again soon.
PlayStation